Hi and welcome to this video on UiPath with me, Jeppe. In this one we're continuing our look at apps. This is the second video in the series. I'm not sure how many videos there are going to be in this series, but this is the second one, and in this one we're going to do a little bit of layouts, and then we're going to do some simple data binding and some simple rules. So let's get to it. So this is the shell of an app that we built in the first video. It has a header, it has navigation over here on the left, and when you click one of these three buttons, different pages are loaded here in the main panel. We want to build two functions today. We want to build a function on the first button and the first page where we can load a customer, and then on the second button and the second page we will load orders for our customer. And those are two fairly simple tasks, but in order to do anything inside of an app you need an automation in the background. So let's quickly jump to Studio. And here we can see I've built a very simple project. It has two files in it, one called getCustomer and one called getCustomerOrders. And if we look at getCustomer first, we can see in the arguments pane that this takes and gives quite a few arguments. There's a customer ID argument that is both an in and outgoing argument, and then there's a number of outgoing values in the form of company name, contact name, address, city, and country. And we're going to use that data in our automation. So what happens is when we run this file, we provide a customer ID, and what we get back is the company name, contact name, and so forth for that customer. And we're going to show that data in our app. The other file, getCustomerOrders, takes also a customer ID as the incoming argument, and then it will provide orders data in the form of a data table object that we return to our app. So we're going to try to bind both to individual values, but also to a data table. The first file, getCustomer, that is our main file, and that is by default marked as an entry point. The other file, getCustomerOrders, is also marked as an entry point. We can see down here we can disable the entry point, but we don't want to do that. We want to keep it as an entry point. If you have no clue what entry points are, I have another video on that, and there's a link in the description below. So what we're going to do is we're going to publish this by clicking Publish, and that'll publish it to our tenant feed if we just click Next a couple of times. This is just standard publishing stuff. And we can see now that it has been published successfully. So we'll jump to Orchestrator. And now we're inside Orchestrator, and we can see here, if we go to the tenant level, we can see that a few seconds ago a package called Northwind was published. And the reason why it's called Northwind is because it's using the way old Microsoft Northwind SQL Server demo database to provide this data for our app. So that's why it's called Northwind. So we have a package. We go to our apps folder here, which is where we want to create the processes. And we can see that when we go to the Processes tab, we don't have any processes in here yet. So we want to create those. I'll click plus, and I'll select my Northwind package. And then over here in the runtime arguments, I can select getCustomer, or I can select getCustomerOrders. And these are the entry points. And this is a fairly new feature. Again, I made a video about it. Go watch that and have some fun and all of that. But this is just where you pick which one of the two files inside the package do you want to run in this process, and we want to run the getCustomer file. So we click Continue, and we will call this process getCustomer data, and we'll click Create. So now we have a process called getCustomer data. It calls the Northwind package, and inside of that it calls or runs the getCustomer SAML file. So we'll create another process, also using the Northwind package, but using the getCustomerOrders file. Click Continue, getCustomerOrders, and I'll click Create. And now we have two processes, getCustomer data and getCustomerOrders. So this is all we want to do inside of Orchestrator so far. So we'll go back to App Studio and take a look at our app. What we want now is we want to create a page to hold all of this customer data that we wanted. And that is what we want to happen when we click the Page 1 button. We will edit the Page 1 button, and we will call it Page Customer. And then we will also change the text to customer data. And while we're at it, we'll change the properties for Page 2 as well. And we'll call this one Page Orders. And there's a reason why I always name these controls, and you'll see that in just a few minutes. And also we will change the text to orders. Right. So in order to actually edit the customer data page, we can't do that in here. We have to go down here to the actual page that is shown when we click the customer data. Again, if this is all completely foreign to you, go watch the first video, because in that video I explain how we make this navigation work so that when you click this button, something is shown in here, and when you click that button, something else is shown in here. But what is shown when we click the customer data button is page 1. So we'll go to edit that page, and now we can see that takes up the whole page. That's because all of the navigation and all of that has been removed now while we're editing this page. So we'll change the name of the page to page customer, and then we'll add a couple of controls to that page. We will add a container with a container layout, and inside of this layout we're going to add a couple of cells up here at the top. I will just resize those a little bit like that. And then we'll add one below here, and we'll give that a little bit more room. Then in the first cell up here, we are going to add another control, and that will be a display control, and that'll be a header. And we will change the text for that header to customer data. In the style tab here, I will just make sure that inside of this cell, things are placed in the middle. So I'll click this button, and then it looks a little better. I will also rename the container CT header, and this other cell over here I will rename CT load, and this final cell I will call CT customer data. Inside this load cell up here, we'll add a couple of controls. Let me just resize it a little bit, and then we'll go back to the right size in a second. But when I add controls here, and we're going to add some input controls, we'll add a button, and we'll also add a text box. And we can see that these are placed on top of each other. But if I select the cell again and select horizontal here, they will be placed next to each other. Then we can say that we also want this to be centered vertically, and we want them to be lined to the right edge over here. And now I can resize this so it looks a little bit better. I can rename the text box to TXT, and we're going to enter the customer ID in this text field. So that's what I'll call it. And the button I'm going to call BTN load customer. And for the text on that button, I will say load customer, and we'll even do a little icon. And we can search for an icon, and we'll select this one. So now we load a customer by providing the ID of the customer in this text field. Now, where do we want to put that data? We want to put it in some controls that we're going to add to this panel right here. So we will add a new control. We are going to add a display control. We're going to add, a label. And then over here in the tree view over here, I can right click that label and click duplicate. And I'll do that twice. So we get 3 labels over here. Then I'm going to add another control to this cell. And that will be an input control in the form of a text box. I'll add it right here. And for the styling, I will say that I want this to fill out the entire width of whatever container that is in. I will also right click this text box and select duplicate, and I will do twice, so we get 3 text boxes, and then I'll rearrange them a little bit so that we get some labels with each their own text box beneath it. Then I'll take this entire container here, select that out here in the tree view, and then, let me make sure I actually do select it, CT customer data, and then I'll right click that and select duplicate, and then it'll create a duplicate of that. So now we have 2 containers next to each other that can hold a lot of data. Now I'm just going to speed up the video while I rename some of all of these labels and text boxes so you don't have to wait for that. Okay, so all of the controls have now been renamed properly. So what we want to do now is we want to put some data into those controls. And the way we do that is by on this load customer button, we want to have something happen when we click it. And we do that by going to the Events tab here and create a new rule. And what we can do inside this rule editor, and we get more into that in a later video, we're going to do some very simple rule binding here, is we want to start a process. And that's the process that we just created in Orchestrator. So I click Start Process. And then it asks me, what process do you want to start? And I can type that in here. But when I click this box, we get this resources pane up. And we can see here that we don't have any processes added to our project here yet. So I click the plus sign here. That will give me some options. And I'll just click my demo tenant over here and click Next. And when I do that and click the apps folder where I created the processes just before, I can add the get customer data and the get customer orders processes. So when I click select, and now the processes have been added to this project. And they actually added, if we collapse all of this stuff, all of these pages, we can see here at the bottom of this project pane, we have the two processes, get customer data and get customer orders. So if we go back to our page customer and back into the rule editor, we can now select the proper process to run. And this one was get customer data. So we just drag it in. And now we need to tell it a couple of things. First of all, we'll tell it that we want to run the process in unattended mode. It's running on a remote machine, so we'll just have it that way. And then we'll need to do an input override because we want to input the text that the user input into this text field next to the load button. So we'll click input override and click the field. And now it'll ask us what argument is it you want to provide some data for. Well, in this case, it's the ingoing customer ID argument. So we'll drag that down here. And then what value is it you want to put in? I'll just click here. And then we can select from our page customer here the control where the user enters the customer ID. And this is where it's really important that you've done all of this naming. And I know it's a hassle to do it, but it's almost impossible to find a control unless you've named it properly. So we have the TXT customer ID text box here. So we'll drag that over here. And now when this process is run, when somebody clicks the button, the customer ID the user entered into the text box will be sent to our process in Orchestrator and return, hopefully, the correct data. So let's try and do that. We'll click close here. And now we need to define what fields should be bound to what data. So if I click the customer ID field here, what do I want as the text inside that field? I click this value binding field right here. And now I can see what data I get back from the get customer data process. And in this case, it's the outgoing customer ID value. And I can either drag it over here and just let it go on the field that I want to have it written to, or I can drag it over here to the right, and I tend to do that. So now we can see on the text field that there's a little sort of a chain link here that signifies that this is now bound to a data source. We'll do the same for the company name, for the contact field, for the address field, for the city field, and for the country field. There we go. And now the fields are actually data bound. So let's do a quick preview of this. Our app has loaded, and if I type in the ID of a customer up here and click load customer, then in just a few seconds, hopefully, we should see some data. There we go. Now, of course, we didn't get any feedback. We couldn't see if it was loading or what it was doing while we were waiting for the data to appear. So let's go back and make one small modification. If we click the button here again and go into the events and edit the rule, we can say that when we start the running of this process, we want something to happen. And what we want to do is we want to show the user that something is happening. And we can do that by clicking here and then selecting show a spinner. Then I get this little editor here, and we can set the spinner to be either visible or not visible. And of course we want it to be visible. And then we can type in here, loading customer data. Then we can collapse this thing when started and then expand the when completed section And in here we can do the exact same but opposite by again selecting the Show Hide Spinner option and then select that the spinner should not be visible. And that's it. So if we do a preview again now, and type in the ID of a customer and click load, it's going to show this spinner that says loading customer data, and as soon as it's done loading the data, the spinner should disappear and our data be visible. And there we go. So this was a very simple example of data binding to individual controls with individual values. So let's go to the next option, and that is the orders page. So I'll just close this, and we will collapse some of all of this stuff here and go to this second page here, the page 2, and we will rename that page orders. And we'll do just about the same, but not quite, because it's a lot easier when you're just binding to a data table. So I'm going to add the text field for entering the customer ID and the search button, just as in the page orders. And while I do that, I'm going to speed up the video so you don't have to watch that. And then we'll get to some fun stuff in just a second. Okay, so basically I built the same loading mechanism as we saw in the customer page. Now I'm just going to add a cell below this one, and we'll expand that to fit a new control, and that's going to be a table control. So I add new control, and I grab the table control from the display group and dump it inside this cell. And then I'm going to do a little bit of styling. I'm going to say that I want the table to fill out the entire width of this cell. And we'll set the height of the cell or the table, and we'll just set that to 450 pixels just to make it easy. So what we want to do is we want to display our data that we load inside of this table. And we do that by going to the General tab for that table and then setting the data source. And the data source is going to be the orders data from the Get Customer Orders process. So I drag the orders data over here. And now for the individual columns, I can set whatever field it is I want that column to contain. So I click the first column here. And what I can see is for the Get Customer data that we used in the first page, we can see all of the fields. But for the Get Customer Orders, we can only see that there's an orders data table. So there's something we have to do before we can move on. If we go to the Get Customer Orders process down here, and click the results for it, we can see that there's nothing in here. There's a little 0 here. So it means it cannot find any fields. So what we have to do is we have to go into Orchestrator the first time. And then we have to run the Get Customer Orders process. So I just click Run. And in order for it to return any valuable information, we'll go to the Arguments tab and we'll type in a value for this one run. And we'll type in the ID of a customer, save, start, and that should then run successfully. If we go to the Jobs tab here, hopefully in just a second we can see that it's running and it has been successful. So now if we go back to our studio here and we do a refresh, we get 14 results or 14 fields returned, because now it knows what sort of stuff that data set or that data table contains. And apparently it reads that from the jobs history table in Orchestrator. So I think it's a little tricky that we have to do this, but that's how it is. Now you know how to fix it. So if we go back to our page now, the page orders, and now select our table again. If I now click in the first column, we can now see, if I just collapse the customer data field here, we can see all of the fields that are contained inside the orders data table. So in the first column, we want the customer ID, and we drag it to the top field here of these two. There's also a column heading field down below. We drag it to the top one, and then it will infer what should be in the column header, and we can put in a space because we like that. And then we'll go to the next column, and we will say we want the order date, for example. And we'll also click here and insert a space there. And we'll take one more field and we will say ship name, and that shows who it is being shipped to. So now we've actually data bound this table to the data table that we get back when we click the load orders button and run the get customer orders process. So let's try and go to the preview. No, before we do that, let us create a rule, because we haven't done that yet. So we create the rule. We've only done the data binding. We haven't set it. We haven't told it what process to start actually. Start process. We'll just do it quickly this time. Get customer orders. Unattended. Input override. Set the input argument of customer ID to the value of the text customer ID from our page. Set the spinner to be visible when we start it, and to be invisible or not visible when we complete. This should be right. Let's close it up and see if it works. Go to the orders page, type in Frank, and hopefully we should get some data very soon. And there is our data. So that was just a very quick look at how you do a little bit more of layout stuff, and also how you do some simple data binding and some simple rule creation in the App Studio for UiPath apps. We are going to do some more advanced stuff in the coming video or videos. I'm not sure about how many I'll do, but we're definitely going to do a little bit more advanced rule creation and also some more advanced data binding. So hopefully you'll stay tuned for that. If you want to see it, make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell and all of that. And if you like this video, I know it was a little bit long, I'm sorry. But if you liked it, give it a thumbs up, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching. Stay safe. Bye.